A silent salute hid a secret code and led to a shocking arrest at the palace. Welcome to the channel, where true stories and untold mysteries come to life. Today's tale will keep you on the edge of your seat. But before we dive in, take a moment to say hello in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. Your interaction means the world to us and helps this community grow stronger every day. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow we'll be back with another powerful story you won't want to miss. Now, settle in and get ready for something unforgettable. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon at Buckingham Palace, a routine diplomatic tour, well secured, meticulously timed, and rehearsed down to the second. The sun filtered gently through the ancient stained glass windows of the West Wing, casting colorful reflections onto polished marble floors. Diplomats and historians wandered respectfully through the royal gallery, their eyes pausing on priceless artifacts dating back to the 1600s. And then, it vanished. A royal seal made of solid gold, no larger than a silver dollar, once used by King Charles II himself, had disappeared from its display case. The glass hadn't been broken. The lock showed no signs of tampering. The security feed revealed nothing out of the ordinary. The time window? Less than 10 minutes. Panic did not erupt. This was Buckingham Palace, after all. But tension simmered beneath the surface. Within the hour, internal security had cordoned off the area. Interrogations began, quietly and efficiently. But even among the most trusted eyes, no one had seen a thing. Only one detail stood out. During that window of time, a small rotation of 5 Queen's Guards had been assigned to the hallway adjacent to the gallery. Known for their absolute stillness, ceremonial precision, and unwavering silence, they were the last people anyone would suspect. After all, these were men who could stand in the pouring rain or blistering heat without so much as blinking. Their focus was legendary, their movements minimal. Among them was Thomas Gray, 37 years old, a 12-year veteran of the Queen's Guard. Thomas was not just a man in a red tunic and bearskin hat. He was a soldier through and through. Before Buckingham, he had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He had trained in counter-surveillance. He knew how to listen, how to wait, and, most importantly, how to observe. And something didn't sit right. As the others returned to their posts, confident that the investigation would clear the unit, Thomas lingered. His instincts whispered that this was no external breach. The lack of forced entry, the absence of any anomalies on the cameras, it all pointed to one thing: someone on the inside. But who? And how could they have done it, under the watchful eyes of both security and tradition? The Queen's Guard are bound by strict rules. During a shift, they cannot speak. They cannot move except during designated patterns. And they most certainly cannot break rank to accuse a fellow guard without concrete proof. Thomas knew that, if he were wrong, speaking up could mean disciplinary action, or worse, dishonor. So he said nothing, but he began to watch, quietly, closely. His eyes, trained by years of battlefield reconnaissance, became his only weapon. Every shift he scanned for the smallest detail: an uneven step, a uniform adjustment made too frequently, a misplaced button, or a gesture slightly out of rhythm with the drill. It didn't take long for something to catch his attention. One of the newer guards, Daniel Fletcher, age 28, had transferred from Windsor just 2 weeks prior. Thomas noticed that Daniel had already swapped out his ceremonial gloves 3 times in 5 days. A strange habit, considering the gloves were built to last for weeks, even with daily use. It wasn't enough to raise alarm, yet. But for Thomas Gray, the theft of a royal artifact wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was a violation of something sacred. His duty wasn't just to stand still. It was to protect the crown, even if that meant uncovering betrayal from within the very ranks sworn to defend it. And so, he waited. Silent. Still. Watching. Because sometimes the thief isn't the one who breaks in. Sometimes he's the one standing right next to you. Thomas Gray didn't sleep much that night. He lay in the barracks, eyes open, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. His instincts, sharpened by war and hardened by discipline, wouldn't let him rest. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. Daniel Fletcher's glove, the strange way it creased at the wrist and that thin blue thread glinting under the corridor lights. It was small, almost nothing. But Thomas had learned long ago that in the world of military precision, small details could unravel entire missions. The next morning, the palace resumed normal operations. The diplomatic visitors were gone, and the royal household wanted the matter quiet. Too quiet, if you ask Thomas. He was sure they didn't want word of a theft spreading beyond the walls of Buckingham. Thomas reported for his next shift as if nothing had happened. The Queen's Guard, after all, were trained not just to endure silence but to become it. He stood at his post like a statue, facing the grand corridor outside the Queen's private gallery. Tourists snapped photos, children pointed at his towering bearskin cap, and staff passed by with polite nods. But Thomas wasn't idle. Behind the stillness, he was studying everything, every footstep, every flicker of fabric, every heartbeat in the marble stillness. Daniel stood again across from him, about 20 feet away. Same sharp jawline, same flawless uniform, same unreadable expression. To anyone else, he looked perfect. But Thomas noticed it again, the gloves, brand new. A crispness to the cotton, the way they flexed just a little too easily at the seams. No sign of wear. And then a break in the pattern, as Daniel adjusted his rifle sling, a standard routine movement. His glove tugged slightly at his sleeve, revealing a faint bulge beneath the wrist, not unlike a small cloth pouch flattened against the skin, barely noticeable. But Thomas saw it. That was the second time. He needed to be sure. Thomas couldn't speak, he couldn't act, he couldn't even turn his head. But he could plan. There was a ceremonial inspection scheduled later that day. One of the few times officers conducted close-range checks on uniform quality and formation. It was his best shot. During the rehearsal for the inspection, Thomas took a calculated risk. As the formation moved into the east courtyard, he subtly slowed his march, enough to end up one position off. He corrected with a sidestep, bringing himself right beside Daniel, within 2 feet. It was then he saw it up close. The inner seam of Daniel's glove had been resewn, sloppily by civilian hands. The thread wasn't just blue. It was synthetic nylon, not issued by the regiment. And something else, a tiny bulge the size of a coin, barely visible through the stretched fabric when Daniel adjusted his grip. The object had weight. It pulled slightly when his hand dropped. That was it. Thomas didn't flinch, didn't break formation. He simply noted the exact time, the angle of the light, and the behavior, so he could report it, if needed. But in his mind, the decision had been made. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't pride. This was evidence, built moment by moment, shift by shift. The gloves had told him the story. And tomorrow, during the Queen's birthday parade, the most public event of the month, Thomas knew Daniel would try to finish what he started. The only question now was how to stop him without making a single sound. The next morning arrived like a held breath. The Queen's birthday parade, trooping the color, was one of the most iconic ceremonies in British tradition. Thousands would line the streets, cameras flashing, diplomats watching, and every move choreographed down to the second. The Queen's Guards would be in full ceremonial formation, rifles gleaming, boots polished, and discipline unbreakable. For most, it was a show of splendor. For Thomas Gray, it was a ticking clock. The relic was still missing. Daniel Fletcher was still in uniform, and Thomas was now sure today would be his move. The cover of the parade, the chaos, the brief gaps in attention, all the conditions were perfect for a second attempt. But Thomas couldn't confront him, couldn't shout or lunge or accuse. Not here. Not in front of the royal family and half the world. He had only one tool, a silent alarm known only to senior guards and high command, an encoded sequence of foot taps and posture shifts designed for emergencies too discreet for public panic. It was created decades ago during Cold War drills and almost never used. But Thomas had trained for it, and now he'd have to use it perfectly, without breaking character. The procession began. Rows of red tunics marched in unison through horse. Guards parade, the sound of synchronized boots like thunder on stone. The royal band played, flags waved, crowds roared. But Thomas heard none of it. He was locked in, hyper-focused, counting every step, every breath. Daniel marched 2 rows ahead, his movements crisp, unshaken. But Thomas had learned to watch not the man, but the hands. And there it was. As they rounded the Victoria Memorial and aligned for the Queen's Pass, Daniel subtly dropped his right hand to adjust his glove. It seemed innocent, but Thomas saw the same tell. The fabric tugged unnaturally near the wrist. Something hidden. Something waited. It was time. Thomas shifted his boot, heel down, and tapped 3 times in rapid succession. Then he rotated his chin 2 inches to the left. An unauthorized move, but one that signaled code silent black. Internal breach. Immediate observation needed. Do not alert target. At the observation tower, Captain Lewis, former Falklands officer and now head of formation command, noticed the movement. His eyes narrowed. He reached for a field mic and relayed to Security Station 4, planted behind the East Arch. Confirm signal received. Discreet shadowing begins. Suspect. Fletcher, Daniel. Track post formation. The ceremony continued without disruption. Thomas held position. He couldn't watch the chase, couldn't know what was unfolding just yards away. But deep inside, his breath slowed. He'd done what he could. It was out of his hands now. 20 minutes later, as the Queen's carriage departed, and the guards returned to formation, Thomas noticed something. Daniel was gone, replaced by a reserve guard. No one around him flinched. No panic, no whispers. Perfectly executed. That night, Thomas was summoned, not to barracks, but to a private chamber beneath the palace, where military intelligence handled internal investigations. The relic had been found, taped to the inner lining of a ceremonial glove, wrapped in waxed cloth, ready to be smuggled out during uniform turnover. Daniel had planned to slip it into a museum transit crate, posing as an artifact handler during the post-parade equipment shuffle. But not today. Today, silence had spoken louder than words. Thomas stood quietly as the investigators confirmed the arrest. Then with a nod of thanks, Captain Lewis stepped forward and shook his hand. "Guard Gray," he said, voice firm. "You did your duty, and you did it flawlessly." Thomas nodded, his expression calm. But in his mind, one truth echoed clear. Sometimes the loudest alarm is the man who says nothing at all. The room was silent. Underground beneath Buckingham Palace, in a windowless chamber lit by a single brass lamp, Daniel Fletcher sat cuffed to a steel chair. His ceremonial uniform had been stripped away, replaced by a plain gray jumpsuit. The gloves, now evidence, rested inside an airtight evidence box on the table. Across from him sat 2 men, Captain Lewis, stoic and controlled, and Major Harrison, the military intelligence officer brought in just that morning. Thomas Gray stood by the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Daniel didn't look at him. "Start talking," Harrison said calmly, his voice low but firm. "You're not just some relic thief. We know that much." Daniel stared at the table. Seconds passed, then, finally, he spoke. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "Go how far exactly? Infiltrating the Queen's Guard? Stealing royal property? Planning a second smuggle under the nose of a sovereign parade?" Daniel didn't flinch. "They said no one would notice, that I'd be out before anyone caught on." "Who's they?" Harrison leaned forward. Daniel hesitated. Then exhaled. "Private contractors, not British, Eastern European. They've been targeting artifacts tied to monarchies across Europe. Spain, Denmark, even Vatican relics. Selling to black market collectors. Royal items fetch the highest price." Thomas stepped forward now, his voice calm but piercing. "And you? Just another hired uniform?" Daniel looked up at him. "You." Think I enjoyed it? I served 5 years in the British Army, left with nothing. No pension, no housing, barely a job. They offered more money than I'd seen in my life. Still doesn't explain the gloves, Harrison said, eyes narrowing. Daniel nodded toward the evidence box. Each glove was custom-stitched, lined with a non-metallic pouch, insulated to pass metal detectors. I smuggled the seal out of the gallery during my second shift, kept it hidden during inspection cycles, was supposed to hand it off in a museum transport crate, posing as a logistics officer after the parade. Lewis shook his head. And what if you'd succeeded? Another piece of history gone, traded for cash. Daniel's eyes fell again. It was just an object. No, Thomas said quietly. It was a legacy. A beat of silence passed. Then, Daniel added, I didn't expect you to notice. Thomas looked him dead in the eye. That's your mistake. You thought the Queen's Guard was for show. He turned to leave, but Harrison stopped him. One last thing, he said, facing Daniel again. How many others are in? Daniel swallowed hard. At least 2 more, embedded in different royal institutions. One's already in the Tower rotation. The other, I don't know. Maybe Windsor. They keep us separate. That was all Thomas needed to hear. He left the chamber and emerged into the cool, stone-lined corridor, the echo of his boots a steady rhythm of purpose. Above him, the palace carried on as usual. Guards switching posts, tourists snapping photos, the national anthem faint in the distance. But below, a hidden war had begun. Thomas returned to the barracks, sat on the edge of his cot, and pulled a notebook from his locker. Inside he began to write not a report but a list. Not names yet, but patterns, movements, inconsistencies, things only someone like him would see. This wasn't over. He'd uncovered one breach, but now he knew there were more, and Thomas Gray, the silent sentry, would be watching, because in a world of ceremonial perfection, it's easy to overlook the enemy dressed just like you. And sometimes, the quietest soldier is the only one who hears the truth. The rain fell in a steady rhythm against the palace windows. Outside, the crowds had thinned. The parade grounds were quiet again. Buckingham Palace returned to its routine. But below the surface, everything had changed. Thomas Gray sat alone on the barracks bench, still in uniform. His gloves laid neatly beside him. He stared ahead, his posture straight, but his mind ran through every word from the interrogation. 2 more infiltrators. One, possibly stationed at the Tower of London. Another, maybe Windsor. And Daniel Fletcher had only been the beginning. Thomas reached for the leather notebook again, flipping past pages filled with drills, formations, inspection notes, until he found the new section, irregularities. At the top of the page he had written in small block letters, "Patterns don't lie." He didn't know exactly what he was looking for yet. But he would find it. He always did. A soft knock came at the door. Captain Lewis stepped in, rain still glistening on his coat. "You off duty, Gray?" he asked. Thomas stood. "Yes, sir." Lewis walked over, handed him a sealed envelope. "This came from upstairs, direct from Her Majesty's Security Council." Thomas opened it carefully. Inside was a formal transfer order, temporary reassignment to the Royal Internal Protection Division. Unofficially, a quiet task force built to hunt infiltration from within. "You've earned their attention," Lewis said. "They want you watching the ones we've all assumed are untouchable." Dumas looked at the orders, then up at Lewis. "And if I accept, you'll operate under protocol blackout," Lewis said. "No one can know who you're watching. You'll still wear the uniform, still stand in formation, but now you'll also be listening, tracking, decoding. Quietly." Thomas nodded once. "I accept." That night he packed only the essentials. 2 sets of gloves, both regulation issue. 1 black pocket notebook. A worn photograph of his old squad from Helmand, still folded and creased. He tucked it into the inner lining of his tunic, right where Daniel had hidden the stolen seal. But his reason was different. That photo reminded him who he was really serving. Not just crown and country, but the men beside him, the ones who stood silent, proud, and honest, the ones who bled for tradition without ever seeking credit. The next morning, Thomas stood at his new post, Buckingham's South Gate. The tourists were back, smiling behind umbrellas. Cameras clicked. Children waved. He stood motionless, his rifle resting along his shoulder, his boots steady on the slick stone. But now every passer-by was a potential asset. Every glance, every delayed salute, every uniform adjustment meant something. Across the yard, a guard sneezed twice. Too soft, too rehearsed. Thomas logged it. Another near the archway tapped his thumb 3 times on the butt of his rifle. Unusual rhythm. Logged again. He wasn't paranoid. He was focused. And as the day went on, the weight of his new mission settled on his shoulders. Not heavy like fear, but grounded like responsibility. Because somewhere behind one of these masks, the next betrayal was waiting. Thomas knew the enemy wouldn't come shouting. They would come dressed like him, trained like him, standing beside him. But he would be ready. The Queen's Guard was never meant to bend, to speak, or to react. But sometimes, very rarely, it becomes the one thing standing between a quiet kingdom and a silent coup. What did you think of today's story? We'd love to hear from you. Was Thomas Gray's quiet discipline inspiring? Did the hidden layers of deception inside Buckingham Palace surprise you? Drop a comment below and tell us. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the silent signal during the parade, the interrogation beneath the palace, or the haunting final line? They would come dressed like him? And here's a challenge for the keen-eyed among you. If you were in Thomas's position, what clues would you have looked for first? Would you have spotted the gloves, the thread, or something else entirely? Also, let us know where you're watching from. We have viewers all over the world. Soldiers, veterans, history lovers, and mystery fans. And your voice adds so much to this growing community. Your thoughts help guide our next episode. So don't just watch, be part of the mission. Like, share, and most importantly, comment. Because sometimes the real story is the one you tell.